And at the top of our 7 o'clock hour, we welcome Jeff Clayton. Jeff, good morning and welcome to the program.
Morning. Thanks for having me on.
We're glad that you're here. And folks, a little bit about Jeff is he joined the American Bail Coalition as policy director in May of 2015. He's worked in various capacities as a public policy and government relations professional for 15 years, also licensed as an attorney for the past 12 years. Most recently, he worked as the general counsel for the Professional Bail Agents of Colorado and representing the Colorado State's Courts and Probation Department, the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, and the United States Secretary of Transportation. He's also a prior Presidential Management Fellow and finalist for the U.S. Supreme Court Fellows Program. Mr. Clayton holds a BBA from Baylor University, MS Public Policy from the University of Rochester, and a JD from the Storm College of Law, University of Denver. Well, Jeff, a subject that doesn't really get attention, but needs to, is talking about the bail reform movement and the abolition of money bail has been touted as the next step towards social progress. And there are bills pending in the legislature as a growing number of states. Simultaneously, a spate of lawsuits in courts around the country are attempting to render commercial bail unconstitutional. Why is that?
Well, I think it's just a general distaste for the idea that somebody could afford bail and somebody else couldn't afford bail, and that really oversimplifies the system. But that's generally the reason that we have right now. It's just, it's basically social justice, economic justice, talking points is what the movement's all about.
And here's a curious point. Billionaire George Soros has poured enormous amounts of money into bail reform, and he's backed candidates for district attorney who have advocated abolishing bail in numerous elections throughout the country. Well known for getting involved in political matters, Soros' actual intentions are not well understood, which has led to speculation that his interest goes beyond mere concern for the public good. I would tend to agree with that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's really hard to say what motivates him, but the facts are the facts, which is that he is definitely pushing bail reform movement. I would consider it a litmus test issue for anybody that wants George Soros funding for a presidential run or other run. Like I said, what he's trying to cause, we don't know, but I think Houston, Texas is the best example where the district attorney was bought and paid for by George Soros and implemented a substantial bail reform in addition to a major lawsuit that has caused essentially chaos in the criminal justice system in Harris County, Texas, which is Houston.
So any way to destabilize the country?
Yeah, I think that might have something to do with it, because I think he makes more money when there's instability, from what
Jeff, if I may, the issue of bail itself, if we can talk about that for a moment, why was it originally instituted? What is its purpose and function? And what's the alternative if you do not have bail? What are these people talking about?
Yeah, so, bail dates back to the Magna Carta, even to there's some mention of it in biblical times. Really what it is a guarantee by a third party that you're going to show up for court, and it's been a financial guarantee on this continent for hundreds of years. It's important because, we're trying to strike a balance between liberty and the idea that somebody's going to return to court and face the music. The alternate system is one of what's called preventative detention. It's like the federal system where the government decides who's in and who's out based on using a risk assessment and forecasting who's dangerous and who isn't. And what we've seen in the alternate system is when you give the government the power to incarcerate on a much easier basis, then the government will incarcerate more people. And that's what we've seen, a tripling of pretrial incarceration in the federal system under the preventative detention model.
And if the people in power are not people who believe in individual liberty and personal responsibility, those kinds of things, they could abuse the system, right? They could even get somebody in there on trumped-up charges and have him sitting in jail for who knows how long.
Absolutely, and that's why preventative detention was always disfavored on this continent, at least, because of the idea that we were going to incarcerate political opponents. And certainly with the guy in the White House right now, I'm not sure the ACLU and the folks on the left would be that comfortable knowing that he has the power to preventively detain anybody he wants in the federal system.
So your organization, Jeff, what is your position on all of this and your recommendations?
Well, we think, the right to having a commercial bail bondsman is something that is important, and that is a right in this country, at least recognized by the Supreme Court for over a century. We think that, things like nuisance bail on the low end of some of these cases is unnecessary, and that progress could be made. But we don't think throwing out the entire system and going to a system of preventative detention is really good for anybody, except people that want to lock more people up.
We know from the left what we've heard them say is a lot of the left now, based on their rhetoric and their actions, embracing more and more of what I consider to be anarchy, just anti-order. When I hear them, and the reason I say that, Jeff, is because when you talk about throwing open the doors of the jails, throwing open the borders, disabling the ICE, the police, and to me that's chaos. And when you do away with the bail system that takes away accountability, kind of sounds like to me you're sending a signal to criminals that carte blanche. Am I drawing wrong conclusions?
No, they certainly figure it out in a hurry. And in New Mexico, where there's been substantial bail reform, they have cases where the suspects are dancing in court on their way out the door because they know that the prosecutors are powerless to do anything.
So crime pays in New Mexico.
Absolutely.
And you're sending the wrong message to borderline criminals. The reason why, we try to be punitive against crime is to show others that it doesn't pay. Don't choose this path. If you're contemplating doing wrong, don't do it. Abandon that idea.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, we've seen cases, I was lobbying a senator talking about a guy who had 35 additional crimes before he was convicted of the first crime. And he said, Jeff, you missed a case. There was a guy that had, 57 crimes before he was convicted of the first crime. So it just turns the system into a revolving door.
So, Jeff, what about the argument they make that it's not fair, that there are people with lots of money and it's nothing to them to plunk down $100,000 and walk free, and many other people can't do that, so they're going to be, by definition, left in that prison where others could walk for a while they await their trial. What is your response to that?
Well, I think that doesn't generally capture reality. Obviously there's the Paul Manaforts, there's the Bill Cosbys, there's those kind of cases, and judges need to set bail higher in those. I mean, if you look at the Bernie Madoff case, bail was set extremely high, and assets were tied up during the pendency of the case for restitution. So judges should be doing higher bails, at the top end of these cases. But for the most part, bail is a test of your ties to the community more than it is how much money you have.
That's interesting you saying that, and I was thinking the same thing, that you would want to have the bail be set at a level that is equal pain, if you will, to the person who's posting the bail. If you skip bail and they lose that money, it's meant to be a deterrent. It's meant so that either you, if you're the person posting it, or your friend is going to make sure that you stick around because you don't want to lose all that money. It's too much to lose. So that amount for someone on the lower income level is going to be a smaller figure, but it'll still have the same impact because percentage-wise, in a sense, they will feel the same amount of pain. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, that's right. And really what we're looking at is creating a financial guarantee and economic incentive to make sure that a third party will lean on the defendant, or the defendant themselves will have too much to lose so that they will show up for court. And then if they don't, that the bail bondsman has enough on the line that they'll go find the guy and return him to court.
And also it saves us some money as a side point, but the more people are in jail, the more we have to spend to house them and feed them and clothe them and all that. So it helps us tax base wise for people to be able to be out on bail who are not a flight risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think and that's what we've seen in states without the bail bondsman, is that particularly like Maryland, where the judges can choose between jail and putting somebody out on an ankle monitor. When they don't have bail, they're going to choose jail. And so we will allow more people to get released for that reason.
And Jeff, I'm a constitutional conservative, so anytime I see somebody on the far left for something, chances are I'm not for it. And George Soros being in favor of these changes is a big red flag for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is suspicious. I think this is a billionaire's bail reform world right now, because we also have the Laura and John Arnold Foundation, who are pushing the use of these criminal risk algorithms. John Arnold, got out, 7 days before the Enron collapse and made billions of dollars, as a hedge fund trader. So anytime you have a couple billionaires teaming up on something, there's reason to be suspicious.
That's a wise advice. Hey, Jeff, when we get back, I'd like to discuss a little bit with you Senate Bill 10 out of California, bail reform. It just passed. So let's find out what that's about, because we know what happens in California often comes across the rest of the country. Listeners, stay with us. We're talking with Jeff Clayton with the American Bail Coalition. We'll be right back after these messages. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to It's a New Day on this Tuesday, August 28th. So glad you're with us. Kim and Pastor Steve here, resuming our conversation with Jeff Clayton, Executive Director of the American Bail Coalition. Jeff, I wanted to hear you weigh in on Senate Bill 10 out of California. Bail reform, they call it, the unconstitution crappy bill is the name of the article on AmericanBailCoalition.org. You say that it passes the Assembly despite a litany of constitutional issues and mounting concerns over the bill and growing bipartisan opposition. What are the constitutional issues?
Well, so we talked about the system of preventative detention, which requires changing a state constitution to deny the right to bail. In California, they put the cart before the horse and basically said, we're going to implement the system, but when it comes to constitutional change, we're just going to ignore that and not do that, which I warned them about. And that is why they caught opposition from the ACLU, the San Francisco Public Defender, and most of the groups on the left, all of which right now we are fighting with to call for a veto, because it also eliminates all bail, whether it's a commercial bondsman or posting your own cash. The second thing that happened was the bill sat for almost a year, and the final language that passed was only out for 24 hours, which we believe has violated the California's constitutional rule against what's called mushroom bills, bills that are germinated in the night. And this bill, like I said, was only out for 24 hours before it passed, and it has to be out for 72 hours.
Okay. And that is unconstitutional because?
Well, it's unconstitutional because you cannot detain someone, without bail, without changing California's constitution to the system of preventative detention. And secondly, because the California Constitution requires that any language that becomes law is out on the internet for 72 hours so that the public has a chance to weigh in. And here they violated, both of those constitutional principles, I would argue.
Well, I will fight back my sarcasm and saying, what does rule of law mean anymore, especially in California? But you're hopeful that the Senate and the governor will listen to the major opposition to the legislation and stop it from becoming law. Has it become law, or is it still being considered?
No, it passed the Senate late last week, and so the governor is considering it right now. And as you say, in California, the rules are whatever we say they are.
Okay. So, what do you foresee the effects on California in the future?
Well, it's really hard to say. I mean, I think this bill, as it stands, really cannot become law because of all the problems it has with it. And the idea that, every public defender is going to be suing every county in California alleging it's unconstitutional if it happens. So I think the governor's taken a serious look at it and saying, well, if we want bail reform, I'm not sure this is what we want. And do I want to leave the state of California with a big mess on their hands? It's going to take, up to 5 years to even resolve it. Mm-hmm.
Just seems to me that's how people make a living these days, out of suing people, Jeff. It's, I don't know whatever happened to working and making a legitimate living. That's what I'm hearing you say is wrong with that bill.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to trigger all kinds of litigation. And the reality is there's all kinds of things we could work on with the groups on the left, and they know that. We all know that. But in this circumstance, we didn't have the opportunity. And the other thing that happened was, $200 million was allocated toward this bill, which was really a payback to the public employee unions because in taking out bail, they're going to put everybody on basically pre-conviction probation and pad the roles of the unions.
We're familiar with that here in Pennsylvania. Well, what if we can, on a positive note, what do you see as the reforms that are needed?
Well, I think, like I said, on the low end, some of these bails really don't accomplish anything. We've had conversations that maybe there should be a minimum bail, because $100 bail really doesn't do anything. It doesn't create an incentive really for anybody to do anything. So that's one thing. The other thing we've seen around the country is due process issues. In other words, and not in Pennsylvania so much, but in places where they rely heavily on bail schedules, that a person can't get in front of a judge to get individual consideration on an expedited basis. And we've seen that throughout the South. And so we've been advocating for greater due process and making sure that people have attorneys and putting the focus that they can, go argue bail and that folks should take it seriously. So those are a couple of things that we advocate for.
Jeff, we had a note here. I don't think we covered this in depth this half hour. There have been reports of violent crimes, including murder, being perpetrated by defendants who were deemed safe and released under new bail reform laws. And the concern for public safety has voiced by a growing number of law enforcement officials, district attorneys, and victims' rights groups. So it reminds me of the fact that there are times when a judge will say you're being held without bail. So I guess if they deem you too dangerous for any release, even if they have the money to do so, they're held. But can you elaborate on that a little bit more about these crimes? Is it true that there is an increase of these where these newer reforms are implemented?
I think so, and we've seen these risk algorithms primarily in cases of prior felons in possession of firearms, treating them and counting them as low risk, telling judges that they're low risk, judges releasing them only to go on to commit additional crimes. Biggest example I think we've seen recently is the New Mexico compound case, where they were actually training terrorists were training kids and abusing them, but training them to conduct school shootings. All those folks walked out on a promise to appear because the risk algorithm counted them as low risk.
That's outrageous. That's mind-blowing.
Well, and this risk algorithm, what was used before by judges to determine whether or not someone was eligible for bail?
Well, the statutory factors in most places, which, look at things like your prior history and your ties to the community and that sort of thing. But what happens is when we cloud it in science, people tend to believe it, even though what we've seen is we don't think it works as even close to as good as human judgment.
Well said. That's very interesting. We see that in other areas as well. But the idea that, the scientists have said this.
And we've also seen reports manipulated, facts and statistics altered for purpose. It happens more and more frequently. Which
again brings us back to the destabilization potential goal that you were saying, Kim, that this having these people out on the street and committing more violent crimes destabilizes the society, makes people looking for answers to stop this, and then the left will step forward and claim they can be the answer to the very problem they caused. Am I on track there with that, Jeff?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the other real problem with these things is people go in behind closed doors and calibrate them. So that decides who's high risk and who goes to jail and who doesn't, which right now they're goring our ox and saying there shouldn't be bail. But, they could put everybody on bail. They could do all kinds of nefarious things behind closed doors and nobody's watching them. Yeah, and they're clouded in science, and that's a real problem.
So how can our listeners be involved? How can they keep track of this and weigh in with their elected representatives?
Well, it's a social media world, so follow us on Twitter, AM Bail Coalition, or check us out on Facebook, or we also have a website, AmericanBailCoalition.org.
Okay. Any closing thoughts before we say goodbye to you for this segment?
No, thanks for having me on, and hope you guys have a great day.
Thank you, Jeff. You as well.
Thanks.
All right, folks, check that out at AmericanBailCoalition.com. That's AmericanBailCoalition.com. It's an interesting topic that I haven't heard much about.
No, me neither. And
when I saw George Soros' name,
trying to find a solution to a problem that isn't really that bad.
No,
they invent the thing and then they start trying to change it.
I'll tell you, these people are insidious. It just is. It's something else, folks, to see what lengths they will go to push their agenda.
And actually, Kim, on a positive note, if we can say this is positive, it should put those of us to shame on the right who believe in the principles that we believe in. May we be as energetic and as vigilant to advance things as we should.
Well stated.